He's learned how to stretch things just when you need it to be. Well, back when I was a sanitary engineer, around Christmas time, all of us had certain routes back then, and I loved Christmas time on my Friday route because there were certain houses, gosh, I had to dump their garbage because some of them would tape like a Snickers bar or Hershey's bar to the can, and some of them would have a birthday or a Christmas card. Some would have a Christmas card with a little 10 spot in there, and I loved it. And about that time of the year, each of us try to help each other. Hey, I'm done with my route. Can I come help you? And I would always say, no, no. I got it handled just fine. See, nobody except me was going to get that booty. Little things at Christmas obviously can make a really big difference. Well, 2,000 years ago, God made a big difference when he decided to become little. Luke 2:7, and she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them at the inn. Well, do you have room for Jesus this Christmas? Cindy just gave me this Creole Bible. And she just did, just for Christmas. I love this. And I told her I'm going to read something from it. I'm going to read that verse in Creole Bible. And she, when born, her number one boy, and wrap him up inside some cloths, and lay him down inside one thing, for hold the cow's food, 'cause no more room for them inside the small hotel. I like it. Okay, man. Do you have room for Jesus? In the fall of 1775, the manager of Baltimore's largest hotel refused lodging to a man who was dressed as a farmer. The manager thought that his low appearance would discredit his inn. And so the man left and found a room in another place. Shortly thereafter, however, the manager discovered that the man he refused lodging to was none other than Thomas Jefferson, the vice president of the United States at the time. And immediately he sent a note to Jefferson and invited him to return as his guest. And Jefferson replied by instructing his messenger, tell him I already have engaged a room. I value his good intentions highly, but if he has no place for a dirty American farmer, he has none for the vice president of the U.S. Well, in much the same way, when the Lord Jesus came into this world, there was no room for him at the inn. After more than 2,000 years, very little has changed. There are no vacancy signs displayed in many a heart and home because there's just no room or not enough room for Jesus. The question this Christmas for all of us, I think, is this. Do you have room for the King of Kings? Do you have room for Christ in your life? As many of us know, few things change your life more than having a kid in the house, bringing a baby into the home. And it certainly changed Joseph and Mary's life. She was roughly about 14 or 15 years old when she gave birth to Jesus. Is that amazing to think about? Before Nancy and I had kids, I used to control my schedule. I determined when I'd go to bed. I determined when I'd wake up. But suddenly this little kid was in control of my schedule and my sleep habits. As many know, though, and some of you know anyway, it's much easier to be a grandparent. Lots of enjoyment, very little sleep lost. Even so, the truth of the matter is babies change our world. But of course, it doesn't stop after they're babies. You got baseball, soccer, dance, piano lessons, college, cars, gas, weddings, etc., etc., etc. The truth is that there are 3 stages of man. First stage, he believes in Santa Claus. The second stage, he doesn't believe in Santa Claus. The third stage, he is Santa Claus. They say that the concept of Santa is rooted in the real Nicholas, Bishop of Myra, dating back to the 4th century. He was, in fact, a wealthy, generous Christ follower, and he freely gave to meet the needs of people around him, fulfilling the commands of Christ to aid the poor. He knew that storing up treasures in heaven was a whole lot smarter than hoarding riches on the earth. The Bible records that there were magi, kings or magi, who were wealthy as well, who lived at the same time that Christ was born. And they, like Nicholas a little bit, were seeking the true treasure. They understood worldly riches were of little value compared to the true king. Matthew chapter 2, verse 10 and 11, and when they, that is, the wise men, saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The kings did great. They did great. But a woman said, 3 wise women would have asked directions, arrived on time, helped deliver the baby, brought practical gifts, cleaned the stable, made a casserole, and there would be peace on earth. Perhaps that's true. My wife Nancy loves Christmas. She absolutely, it's her happy time. It's her happy place. She just gets a pep in her step. There's even a larger smile on her face. That's just always been the way it is. As soon as she hears Christmas music, she lights up. She just loves it. Now, Christmas traditions, sometimes we look at them, we say, oh, come on, let's get rid of all the frills of Christmas. Let's just get down to the nativity scene. But I want you to know that there are Christmas traditions that we have kind of secularized, but they're often rooted in the biblical story. For example, did you know Christmas trees, back in the Middle Ages, on December 24th, a play was performed around a tree. And this tree was a picture of the Garden of Eden and the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And apples were placed on it as a picture of forbidden fruit and the temptation of Adam. Isn't that interesting? Later, red balls replaced apples. And so Christmas trees also remind us of the curse that Jesus took upon himself. Paul writes in Galatians chapter 3, and he's quoting something from the Old Testament, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written in the Old Testament, cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree. And then in those days, wafers were placed on the tree as well as a picture of communion and Christ's body given to save the world. That was the Christmas tree then. And even now we have some remembrance of what it was. Of course, the star that goes on top is the star that led the kings to Bethlehem. Candles, actual burning candles were put on the tree, and you can imagine how that went at times, especially if you didn't water the tree. But they were put there originally as a reminder that Christ came as a light into a dark and doomed world. And of course, it was replaced with electric light when they could. And then candy canes. A lot of people don't know what candy canes' original thing was. Candy canes represent the shepherd's crook, which helps the shepherd gather his lost and stray sheep. And then there are the red and green colors of Christmas. Red stands for fire from the Spirit, while green stands for nature and one's life on the earth. Red, along with green, symbolizes the Holy Spirit's union with nature to be incarnated on earth and save the world. See, there's a lot more to this than we remember. Christmas means, as Sam said, Emmanuel, or God with us. I know many of you know that. But have you stopped to think that he was one of us? And because he was one of us, he knows exactly how we might feel about things. He knows exactly how we're tempted. The Bible tells us that he was tempted in all things like we are, and yet without sin. He knew what betrayal was like. He knew what being cheated on was like. He knew what people lying about him was like. He understood pain. He had He understood physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain. He was tempted in every way, like we are. So doesn't it make sense that he would know exactly how to help you in your time of need? He's been here. He's one of us. He was not only the Son of God, he was the Son of Man. He understands. He's not some distant, far-off, transcendent God way up there in the sky. He is that. But he's also here. He was one of us, and he was in human flesh. You know, there are several prophecies about the first time that Christ would come to the earth. We're going to take a look at just a couple of them. One is found in Micah chapter 5. It's really an awesome scripture. I'm going to read just the last part of verse 1, and then I'm going to head into it. Micah the prophet wrote about 500 or 600 years before Christ came, and he writes, and it's amazing. Some of these guys would prophesy, and sometimes I don't even know that they knew they were prophesying, but they were prophesying. And it says, they are striking the judge of Israel on the cheek with a rod. And then it goes to Bethlehem, Ephrathah. You are small among the clans of Judah. One will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. And his origin is from antiquity, from ancient times. Other versions say his origin is from antiquity, from everlasting. Other versions say he's from eternity. Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. And then the rest of the ruler's brothers will return to the people of Israel. He will stand and shepherd them in the strength of the Lord. In the majestic name of the Lord his God, they will live securely. For then his greatness will extend to the ends of the earth. He will be their peace. He will be their peace. In these short verses, Micah prophesied that the Messiah would be mocked and persecuted by the Romans and the Jews. It says here that he would be hit on the face with a rod, and so it's a clear prophecy. You can take the verse down. It's a clear prophecy that Jesus was going to be mocked and persecuted by the Romans and Jews. Even though it goes on to say that he was the judge of all men. Could you imagine what he went through? Especially when he was loogied on. Somebody, and they spit in his face. And he did nothing about it. Micah then prophesied about Jesus that he would be born in Bethlehem. Roughly 600 or 700 BC, God ensured the fulfillment of this prophecy through a Roman census that took Joseph and his pregnant wife Mary to his ancestral home of Bethlehem. Then in Genesis chapter 49, verse 10, it predicts that the Messiah would come by the 1st century AD. The scepter will not depart from Judah or the staff from between his feet until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. All the way back in Genesis, some 1,500 years it was written before Christ came. It's interesting, these two are kind of working together. You don't look at Genesis necessarily as a prophetic book, but there are a lot of prophetic things in it. The word scepter refers to tribal identity. The word staff means judicial authority. So, the prediction from the book of Genesis, written 1,500 years before Christ, is that the Messiah would come before Judah would lose its tribal identity. Well, it lost it in AD 70, a few years after Christ died, when the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, it was totally destroyed, and so it lost its identity. And it also goes on to say that the judicial authority of Judah was lost in AD 7 when the Romans replaced the Jewish leader over Judah with a Roman one. And then Isaiah the prophet added another piece to the prophetic puzzle of Christ coming to the earth. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. In other words, God with us. So, take these three things together, something that was written by Micah the prophet, and then all the way back in Genesis, and then through Isaiah. Taken together, this means that the Old Testament predicted that the Messiah would be born of a virgin in Bethlehem in the first century. The odds are stunningly against that ever happening by accident. And yet Jesus fulfilled that and several other prophecies given about him. And he fulfilled all of them. God had a plan. He just does. He's always had a plan. He gives us total free will to choose to reject him or accept him, but he always has a plan. And ultimately, it came to pass exactly as God said it would. And I got to tell you something, if you don't already know this, God has a plan for you. He has a plan for you. He has you in mind. He thinks about you. He is for you. Then Micah chapter 5 verse 2 continues, and it's interesting. He says, his going forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity or antiquity, or from the past, or years ago, or everlasting. So what is that saying? What is Micah telling us? He's saying that that baby that was going to be born in Bethlehem has always been. He's eternal. His birth in Bethlehem was not the beginning of Jesus Christ. He was from eternity. Why is that? Because Jesus isn't just the Son of Man, he's also the Son of God. He's always been. I know it's hard to fathom that because we were born on a certain day and we're going to croak on a certain day and assume room temperature. And there are three descriptions of what this Messiah Jesus would do for us found in these few verses in Micah. I think it's very interesting. Promise number, and they're promises really. It's the promise of Christmas is what we're talking about today. First of all, Micah promises something about Jesus. First of all, he says Jesus is going to be our shepherd. Well, Jesus said this. He said, my sheep will hear my voice. If you come to Christ, you are now a sheep. In the first century, a single sheep pen held multiple flocks in it. So it was essential for the sheep to know and recognize their own shepherd's voice. There had to be an unmistakable familiarity between the shepherd and the sheep for the sheep to feel safe and know which voice to follow. There's so many voices talking at us today. Just so many voices, from social media to television to our friends to this, to that, and the other thing, the opinions of men. There's so many voices coming at us. How can we ever discern the true voice of King Jesus and the truth? It's by spending time with him. It's by coming to faith in Jesus. Then you'll suddenly you'll now be able to turn to the radio station where Jesus is actually speaking. We can hear his voice, but we like sheep tend to wander off every now and again. We get off the path, and sometimes we step on landmines as we went through that series. In the Highlands of Scotland, a sheep would often wander off into the rocks and get into places that they couldn't get out of. So the grass on these mountains is very sweet, and the sheep like to eat it because it's so tasty. And they'll jump down 10 or 12 feet, and then they can't jump back again. And the shepherd hears them bleating. He knows their voice. He knows exactly which sheep are down there. And the sheep may stay there for several days until they've eaten all the grass. And the shepherd, what does he do? When he hears the cry of the sheep, does he immediately rescue them? No, he doesn't actually, usually. He waits until they're so faint that they can't stand. And then he will slip a rope around him, and he'll go over and pull that sheep out of the jaws of death. And that's the way it is with us. We often don't go back to God until we have no friends and we've lost everything. When the world is crashing around us, suddenly we need God, and God's okay with it. He understands. He's a good shepherd. So if you're a wanderer, I tell you that the good shepherd will bring you back the moment you have given up trying to lead yourself, trying to save yourself, and you're willing to let him lead and save you his way. The good shepherd knows what we need even when we don't. Now, British shepherds often take sheep one by one. And what they do is very interesting. They'll take them and they'll throw them into a dipping trough. It's a huge vat filled with antiseptic liquid. And the shepherd must completely submerge his animal. And so he'll take his head and he'll put him under the water. Nose and ears and eyes under the surface, and it's very frightening for the sheep. They just don't like it. But if they don't get that treatment, they would become victims of parasites and disease. It's actually for their good. They just don't know it. So we too have a shepherd who is committed to his sheep. And so sometimes things are going to happen in our lives that aren't fair. Sometimes things are going to happen in our lives that stink. We don't like it. We don't like where we are. God, how could you allow this to happen? How could I be treated so poorly? How could I be treated so badly? Not realizing his perspective, which is if you're a son or daughter of God, you're a child of God, he's going to discipline you, and he'll allow certain things to happen in your life as a discipline to actually help you in your life, because you're going to learn to seek him. But Christmas reminds us that the shepherd knows what we need. And then promise number 2, Micah says, we're going to dwell securely. We will dwell secure. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the end of the earth. You know, as a Christ follower, he is promising your security even when you receive a bad report from the doctor. Even when you've lost your job, even when your marriage is kind of on the rocks, I guess. He's with you. He knows what's going on in your life. If ever Janelle Guzman McMillan needed to know she was being held in the strong arms of a God she couldn't see, it was now. You see, it was just after 12:30 p.m. on September 12, 2001, the towers had fallen 27 hours earlier. Amazingly, she was still alive, although the 30-year-old Port Authority clerk had fallen, get this, from the 64th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. She had amazingly survived. But what were her chances of being rescued from the 10 stories of smoking rubble into which she was entombed under? Well, in the depths of despair and smoking debris, she began to pray. She said, I kept my hand out there praying to God. Show me a sign. Show me a miracle. Show me that you're out there, God. And God, she called out to him. She called out to a God that she'd rejected for her whole life. Well, after she kept calling and she was under all this rubble, 10 stories worth, God, help me. Suddenly somebody grabbed her hand, and he used 2 hands to grab it. He didn't have gloves on, interestingly enough. And said, you're going to be all right. You're going to be okay. She was the last person pulled from the collapsed towers. It reminds you and I, it reminds me anyway, that even if you are, even if I was the last person on the planet, Jesus would come after me. Even if you feel like you're all alone and you're the last person God is interested in, not so. He's very interested in you, and he'll come after you. He wants you to dwell securely, even when you're covered with the rubble of life's things that seem to collapse on us from time to time. Christmas reminds us that God is with us at last. Micah's words about Christmas remind us that he shall be our peace. King Jesus shall be our peace. Now, sometimes at Christmas time, some of you notice that family time isn't always as peaceful as you might like it to be. I'm very fortunate. Our family has really, we've had really peaceful kind of gatherings. It's really fun. But no, it isn't always that way. And sometimes we cause the peacelessness in our homes. That reminds me, I heard about a man named Bob. Bob was in trouble. He forgot his wedding anniversary. And his wife was really upset. And so she told him, listen, tomorrow morning, I expect to find a gift in the driveway that goes from 0 to 206 seconds, and it better be there. The next morning, he got up early and left for work, and when his wife woke up, she looked out the window, and sure enough, there was a box gift wrapped in the middle of the driveway. Confused, the wife put on her robe and ran out to the driveway, bringing the box back into the house. She'd opened it, and found a brand new bathroom scale. Bob's been missing since Friday, in case you didn't know. In 1971, John Lennon of the Beatles declared, he said, "The war is over." If only that was true. In fact, the world currently, today, right now, has 110 armed conflicts. But violence has always been with us. 700 years ago, the people of Judah braced for a looming invasion. But then, God's prophet Isaiah wrote that a child called Emmanuel would someday return. That was 700 years before Christ. The promise of Emmanuel is a promise of peace. It really is. He calmed the storms, even to the point that his disciples said about him, "Even the wind and the waves obey him." But it cost him everything to be that peace. His very life was given for us to be at peace with God, and his followers are called to be peacemakers. I want to close with this story. True story. Somewhere around the 4th century AD. And at this point, Rome was basically a Christian nation. Christianity had been legalized for the first 200 plus years after Christ. The Christians were persecuted like crazy. And of course, in Rome, there was the gladiator kind of games. Well, in the 5th century, a monk named Telemachus wanted to live his life in the pursuit of God. And so he moved out, kind of like a little bit John the Baptist-like. He moved out away from everybody, and he would just spend all day just praying and seeking the Lord. But as he prayed for many months and perhaps years, he really sensed the Lord telling him, "Listen, get out of the wilderness. You need to go and start serving people. You need to serve. You need to be around people. You need to serve them." And so he moved back to Rome. And at this time, as I said, Rome was actually not only was Christianity legalized, it was actually officially a Christian nation. And people were pouring actually into churches. It was amazing. Can you imagine? People just, if your nation, we were officially a Christian nation. And it didn't mean they were on fire for Jesus, but Christianity was not only legalized, but it was also the preferred religion. And so many people went to church. But there was one pagan practice still that lingered in Christian Rome, the gladiator games. Now, Christians were no longer thrown to the lions. It was now prisoners of war that were thrown to the lions. And Telemachus arrived on the day of the games with about 80,000 people in attendance. Men for whom Christ had died were about to kill each other to amuse a supposedly Christian populace. And so, in the middle of these gladiator games, he marches in and he jumps over the wall kind of thing that separated the crowd from the games, and he jumps in and he stood between these two gladiators and he implored them, "Stop, in the name of Christ, stop!" Well, the crowd began, they were furious at him, yelling to get him out of there because they didn't want their games to stop. It was like somebody turned the television off and their entertainment was off. The big game was off. And after several shouts and threats, the crowd picked up rocks and began firing at him. And they stoned him to death. Well, the rest of the contests were canceled that day, and 3 days later, the gladiatorial contests were ended. Telemachus gave his life to bring peace to that part of the world. And that's really what Jesus did. Christmas reminds us that Jesus came as a little baby. He lived as a perfect life, and he was crucified in your place, rose again from the dead to bring you and I forgiveness and therefore peace with God. A couple more verses from Micah, this time from Micah chapter 7, verse 18 and 19. Who is a God like you, forgiving iniquity and passing over rebellion for the remnant of his inheritance? He does not hold on to his anger forever because he delights in faithful love. He will again have compassion on us. He will vanquish our iniquities. You will cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. And so Jesus came and he stood like Telemachus a little bit. He stood between us and God. And there was a bridge that was just too big. There was too much sin here. He's perfect in every way, and there's just way too much sin over here. Even the best of us, all our righteousness is as filthy rags. And so somebody had to step between it. Somebody had to die for the union to take place. And so God decided to become one of us, God in a bod. He decided to become one of us and take on himself all those sins. That little baby born in Bethlehem brought us complete forgiveness and cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. But to be forgiven, to become right with God, we need to confess our sin, our wrongs, the things we've done that God doesn't like, basically, if you want to know what sins mean. Turn from that way and turn towards him and receive him. And John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And you can be somebody who has life everlasting. But it requires something of you, it requires something of me, it requires us that we give him our life. We walk a narrow road.
For a while, my feet are getting tired, my heart's a little heavy, but you keep me going. Walking for a while, mile after mile, my soul's a little weary, but you keep me going. It'd be a narrow road. You said it'd be a narrow road. So why am I surprised when it seems I'm on my own? You said it'd be a narrow road. This world will never be my own. The journey might be lonely, but I'll never be alone. No. Wondering
promise of Christmas is that the Good Shepherd will hold you securely in his hands, giving you peace in the middle of the storm. So Merry Christmas. And we'll see you tonight, or we'll see you Christmas Eve. God bless you. Have a good day.